Hi, everybody, and welcome again to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
And John, we have a special guest today. Robert Lang has been in the radio and television news business for 35 years. Right now, he is an anchor and reporter for WBAL Radio in Baltimore. And Rob, I think you do some work for the TV as well. Is that right?
Well, I'll do a little bit. WBAL Radio and Television are very close. We're on the third floor of the building. TV is on the second floor. There's their newsroom and their studios, and we share a lot of information. I, once in a blue moon, will do some on-air work for them, but mostly I'm sharing information with their assignment desk. They're sharing information with me. If you're doing radio news, news radio, all news radio, in this day and age, given where the industry is in terms of the number of people the radio has hired, you need a TV partner, and we have one of the best. And they just happen to be in the same building. They happen to be under the same ownership. The TV folks view us as another platform for their work. So some of their work will wind up in my newscasts. And we view them as a source of material and also another platform for our work. We have one of our other reporters, Phil Yakubuski, does dual duty, both for radio and television. Brian Neiman, one of our morning hosts, will do a spot with the morning TV people at 5:20 in the morning before he goes on the air. Our sports teams, we share people with sports. We share a weather team. We've got an excellent team of meteorologists led by Tom Tasselmeyer, who helps us out. So I always tell students, there's no such thing as just a radio reporter anymore, or just a TV reporter anymore, where you're the guy in the blazer who just goes on the air. You have to be able to write. You have to be able to take pictures. You have to be able to post to the web. You have to be able to edit. You have to be able to fix your own equipment. So you're really doing multiple tasks. And it's the same thing for the folks who are in newspapers and are doing online journalism.
And, it's interesting, Robert, that's one of the changes that we've seen in the last 20 years. It used to be that the different platforms like radio, television, and print, they stayed away from each other. There wasn't much crossover. And today it's totally dynamic.
It's also, it's a change in deadlines too. With the thing with radio news, and Don will know this too, is your deadline is the next available newscast, but really your deadline is constant, because if there was something that was happening while you were out, even if you were off duty, if there was a car crash, or if somebody falls down an open manhole, or trees fall in a tornado, your responsibility is to get that and make sure it gets on the air. I'm driving along the Baltimore Beltway. I see a crash. I'm at least notifying our traffic desk about that. And now it's become that way for newspaper folks who used to have just one deadline, and for TV folks who used to just have the 6 and 11, because they're now dealing with multiple newscasts throughout the day. They're dealing with and we all have a web platform, and that deadline, and social media platforms, and those deadlines are constant. I mean, those are beasts that constantly needs to be fed.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because there's changing paradigms here. I would say, people would talk about radio news. How important is it? And I would say, well, what do you listen to in your car on the way into work? And that still is something that is happening. But all of the television stations now are putting all of their money into their morning news.
That's right.
And the morning news even has traffic.
Yeah, and school closings. It's all that stuff, and it never used to be that way. I mean, in the television side, if you were an NBC station, you had cut-ins at 7:25 and 8:25 during the Today Show. Eventually, that came on with the other network shows. But you might have done a little, and there's all kinds of these things on YouTube, and I sometimes like to watch them. When the station would sign on, an announcer might read the headlines above the station slide, and then they would go to religious or educational programming, and then would go to their morning shows or kid shows or whatever like that. Now, you have newscasts. We have newscasts in the DC area that start at 4 a.m. and with good reason. Is pre-pandemic and even post-pandemic, there are people who live in the outskirts of Virginia and have a several hour long commute. So they're up at 4 a.m. because they got to get in the car at 4:30, 4:45 to begin their commute. My old station WGAL, they start at 4:25. All the stations down here start at 4:30. Because people are up, they have long commutes, and that takes some of the audience away from radio. They might have an alarm clock that they'll wake them up to the radio, and then they turn on the TV. But you can even set your alarm to the TV app. The other thing that's changed with radio, and my news director and I had a conversation about this about a year ago, was think about how you listen. And he asked me, when was the last time you actually bought a radio for your home? It's probably been a long time, a clock radio or something like that. People are listening on their phones through apps, through websites. I will tell you, with us, we've seen an interesting thing. While the in-car listening and the radio listening may be going down, what's going up is the online listening. Is especially for those of us who toil in AM radio, and we've got an AM and an FM repeater. Those of us who toil in AM radio, people under 40 don't know what AM radio is. But when I tell them it's WBAL.com, they listen on the app. They know. So that's the way to get the new audience.
It's so fascinating that what you're saying, it boils down to the fact that your schedules have been driven by the changing schedules of commuters and
Absolutely.
The longer commutes that people have. I mean, Don and I grew up in an area where every day began with an hour-long commute.
Sure.
The freeways of Southern California. And of course, those were the glory years of radio because you were a captive audience. And I guess you're still a captive audience now, but the platforms that you have are various. So can they track them the same way? Can I track WBAL listeners online the same way?
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can. And just as you can track satellite radio, just as you can track podcast use, that's another competitor. There will be people who listen to recorded podcasts if they have a long commute. And I know I occasionally do this when I'm in the car on weekends. I'll listen to different podcasts.
Just like the musical Innertube.
Just like the musical, exactly. And this becomes one of them that I'll be listening to. And it's, so you're also competing with that. The bosses will tell you people have short attention spans, but then again, there are plenty of people who are willing to spend an hour on a podcast on, anything from. My wife loves the one on the West Wing,
right,
where they talk about that. She's willing to listen to that for an hour, so that and that again is a competitor to us. I mean, we're competing with everybody.
I think also. You mentioned earlier about all of the newscasts that have been added by regular television. We also have cable television. We have the 24-hour operations of CNN and Fox News and MSNBC. With that combined with social media, we're on a 24-hour news cycle now, and radio has to keep up.
Absolutely. It is. I find myself. I have my own at Reporter Rob Lang. That's the station Twitter page. I'm at least keeping the Twitter page and the station Facebook page updated during off hours. If something develops, I'll usually repost a story that we're doing, but sometimes stories from other outlets or from our TV side or from some of the other networks to try to keep the audience informed. Because they're coming to our brand, and you have to keep reminding people of your existence and give them product to consume.
Oh, we did it. We even did that my last 5 years at the Inquirer. There was a desk to refresh or to repost things as the news broke, it could from any
wasn't
source.
There some kind of a mandate at the Inquirer at their website that the top stories had to be refreshed every hour so that people would come back?
Well, I think that they do that even more frequently than that now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yes, there certainly was a mandate to keep things fresh, especially if that we had folks who would and I did this myself, who would look at Twitter and look at Facebook to see whether there were, where other people were talking about things eyewitness wise,
Sure.
So it gets down to that granular. So I can imagine though that radio news has to do that even more urgently.
Yeah, and it's sometimes when I anchor a lot of breaking news during the day, and Lord knows we've had plenty of it this last 6 months. Where one of the things I'll keep on the screen in front of me is the Twitter page, because very often the official sources will relay information first on Twitter. I'm going to give you a great example, and it was really a story that I was also on television that day, and unbeknownst to myself, I also knew we were with CBS at the time. Our signal was fed over the CBS radio. Back in January of 2014, there was a shooting at the mall in Columbia, Maryland. Columbia, for those who don't know where it is about halfway between Baltimore and Washington. It's in Howard County, one of the oldest malls, a regional mall, destination mall. And a young man went into a surf shop, Azumi's, and began opening fire. Three people were killed, if I recall, and then the gunman killed himself. Well, I'm working on a Saturday. I get done with the 11:30 update. We're running a Baltimore Ravens show at the time. Producer comes into the newsroom and says, "You need to talk to this guy who just called the station." It was a man whose wife was at the Sears at the mall in Columbia, and she had just said, all sorts of police are converging. There's been a shooting at the mall. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And right away, the instincts were to go to your phone and start calling the police and start trying to get information. I had on my laptop TweetDeck, and the Howard County Police, this is Howard County, Maryland, comes up with has a tweet right away that says, there's been an incident at the mall in Columbia. We are responding. We will have more later. Well, then right away, I knew I had enough to go on the air. We go on the air with a quick bulletin during the sports show. And then we'll come back and we do another bulletin maybe 10 minutes later. Right away, I get a call in our newsroom. Scott Wyckoff, who's our morning reporter, who lives in Montgomery County, was heading back to Baltimore to drop some equipment off to the station. He was right along Route 29 by the mall in Columbia. He said, "I'm turning around and going to the mall." He arrives just as the police are arriving. Meantime, I get the new news on the air. Scott's on the air with me, and we basically do the entire newscast regarding this. It had been a cold day, and there were some other headlines. We sign off at maybe like 10 after 12. The news goes along. So we had a special program on, I think it was a paid program on wine. She takes over for about 90 seconds, and then we come back on the air because Scott has witnesses, and then we are on the air all day. Much of the information that we are getting initially before the press conferences, and they start holding these every hour, came from Twitter, the Howard County Police Twitter, the other law enforcement agencies responding. And so that was your source of information. And you were literally reading tweets on the air. And we were on the air. We were simulcast at one point for television until they could get an anchor on the air. Viewers of WBAL were seeing helicopter TV, were seeing helicopter pictures and maps along with my audio. To get back to the story, Twitter, with the official sources, I will often, the president tweets, we'll read that on the air. As we cover White House news conferences, and we've done those on a daily basis. We were doing it on a daily basis during the pandemic. We do them as they happen, and Joe Biden appearances as well. Reporters traveling with in the White House briefing, the tweets, we might read some of their tweets on the air, and we might say that Weijia Zhang of CBS reports no one is wearing masks as the president is speaking. And so it's the deadline is constant, and you have a source, social media that's constantly fed, and you got to be careful what you read on the air. You got to make sure you're doing it through trusted sources, but that's how things have changed. It used to be, you waited for the wires to go off, or you had to call people and everything.
Let's talk about the whole idea now that we've breached the idea of covering the president and covering the White House under the current administration, and that is the whole idea of fake news and how the media is being discredited in certain quarters. Do you find that a big problem now that people are looking at you and saying, "I don't believe anything you report"?
It is a huge challenge, Don, because we get to, first of all, of what we're reporting, and you want to make sure it's coming from reliable sources, or you verified the information yourself. But you are under more scrutiny and under personal attack, and you're encouraged. Those who are coming after us are encouraged by this president, and I get criticism. And my colleagues at WBL get criticism not only from the right but from the left, especially if you look at our Twitter page. From the left, in part because of where I live in Baltimore, and Maryland is 2-1 Democratic, and in the Baltimore area, it's heavily Democratic. The Republican parts of the state are in Western Maryland and on the Eastern Shore, and in some of the Baltimore suburbs. So you have to be careful about what you report. With some of them who tell you you're fake news, you look back at what you've reported. If there is something that needs to be corrected, something that is not true, that it turns out to be not true, then you go on and correct it, and then you respond to them. Otherwise, to be honest with you, I have to ignore them, because otherwise it's going to bog you down. You can't take it personally. You have to develop a thick skin. There are people who are either they're doing this because they have an agenda, or they're following a leader who has an agenda. And I hate to play both sidesism on this, because this is a favorite defense of the right. The right will say the other side does it, but it's true that both sides do it.
I'm wondering too, just from a standpoint of a guy whose daily bread is based on reporting on the activities. Yeah. Is reporting more difficult now than it used to be? Are people in power better at not telling you what they don't want to tell you? Do you find it, and I'm not asking for opinions about any specific figures, but what do you think?
I will say this. It used to be, when I covered the Pennsylvania legislature, you could talk to a lawmaker in the hallway coming out, and you can still do this in Annapolis, and they would talk to you. Now, and I'm not talking about those in leadership or those who are committee chairmen, but your typical rank and file lawmaker now has somebody who acts as a press secretary. So you have to go through them. So they are trying to manage the message. There is less of the spontaneity that you had when I started in '86. I first worked in Delaware, then I worked in upstate New York, and when I worked in Watertown, New York, I was mainly covering local and county government. And you could call these folks up at home on the weekends, and they would talk to you. Now, these days, you got to go through press secretaries, or you're calling people in their cells, or you're texting them. But very often you may have to go through a spokesman. I can still, deal with some lawmakers on a one-to-one basis, but now it's managed. And I don't think that and I have to tell you something. I don't think the public is better served because the politicians are managing their message. It indicates, although there's some excellent people who serve as press secretaries and public information officers, there is still a sense that they are trying to hide something, that they're trying to limit, if not hide something, limit what you hear. And I think that's bad for all of us.
When we talk about using Twitter and Facebook as sources, this brings in the whole idea of, how do you check your sources? You were talking about making sure that you have the facts right. How do you make sure you have the facts right when you're dealing with stuff that's very ethereal and stuff that could be based on rumor and et cetera, et cetera?
You go on, you do literally, as you're on the air, as you see something on Twitter, you do the studio, you check out the facts. I mean, you go online, you go to that individual source. I might see a report about something, say, involving our Governor Larry Hogan, or criticizing the governor or the mayor. I will immediately, while I'm on the air, text that press secretary and say, hey, look, so-and-so is saying such and such about your boss. Is this true? And they will get back to you. And that's how you do it in an online thing. When you have the time and you're not on the air doing that, you're picking up the phone, or you're texting, or you're emailing, and you're hoping these people get back to you. And if it's something that doesn't seem right, your gut says, hey, don't use it, we don't put it on the air. I mean, it's better. I've always believed, and even before this mass, I've always been better to be. It's better to be last and right than first and wrong. And that's always been, it's, when you're in a breaking news situation, you want to get stuff out on the air, and you're seeing things around you and you're hearing things. And even sometimes the official sources turn out to be wrong. And when that happens, like in a breaking news situation, like the Columbia Mall shooting, or, the school shootings that I've covered, or things like that, you go on the air and you say, hey, look, earlier we were told by this organization that A happened. It turns out A is wrong. Here's really what happened. I think the audience appreciates your candor if you admit that that this isn't, you sort of open the door and you let them know the news gathering process, and that sometimes the information is wrong. And if you're honest with them, you can, I think that helps build trust. And so that's one of the things we do. The other thing you can also, the rules of breaking news and anchoring breaking news. And there were two people that I worked with in Lancaster and Harrisburg that really taught this to me. And I sort of follow their guide every year. One is Chris Fickus, who hired me at WHP Radio and was our news director and anchored the coverage of the Camp Hill prison riots, which was really the first major, massive story I covered in 1989. The other, he's now retired at WGAL, but was Dick Hawksworth, who was our morning and noon anchor, and I would report for his noon newscasts all the time. One of the things is he would ask me a question on the air, and I would sometimes, if I didn't know the answer, you don't make it up. You just say, well, Dick, we simply don't know that answer. We're going to find out, and we'll have more later. And he and I would talk about that. He said, that's a great answer because it's being honest with the audience. It's not trying to mislead them.
You don't have situations where you've misreported something because of, just like you said, the heat of the moment and that sort of thing, or the information coming out is wrong and is corrected. So even if you correct it within a very short amount of time, you don't have situations where people say, I don't trust you.
Well, look, you're not going to win back everybody. You're not going to win back everybody. That's the challenge. The other thing is, I was taught, and again, this with GAL, if you make a mistake on the air, air the correction at the same time of day you made the mistake. So if you were on the 6 o'clock news on Monday night and you said something that turned out to be wrong, make the correction various places, but be sure you make the correction Tuesday night on the 6 o'clock news at the same time, and acknowledge that it's a correction, so that the listener or the viewer who may have been there Monday night is back on Tuesday night. They make sure that they hear the correction.
You must have run into a situation where people are polarized nowadays in their politics and in their opinions for a number of reasons. And there are people that will probably look at you and say, "Oh, you always report. You never give conservatives a break, or you never give liberals a break, because you're always reporting what they want to hear and not what the truth is." And you see where I'm going.
You get that all the time. There is a perception with us at WBAL, and I've fought this for a long time. This was, and I got here in July of 2004. Martin O'Malley was the mayor of Baltimore at the time. His administration viewed us as, yes, we were the big boys in town and we have to cooperate with them and we have to go on their talk shows, but we were an entire station, including the news department, that was out to get him because they were conservative outlets. When there is a definite, I can't speak for Fox News or any other perceived conservative outlets. I can speak for us. There is a definite wall between the news side, which plays it straight, and the talk side. And our talk side over the years has always been right of center. It's not far right. We have a competitor that's more far right than us, than our talk shows, that will parrot the Trump line. And they have their successes and failures. We have ours. But you also you work very hard to make sure you're balanced. Now, I'm in a situation where I don't have a lot of time to tell stories in a regular newscast. The regular 5-minute newscast, you're devoting 30 to 40 seconds on a typical story. I tell people all that you have to look at us not just from the one newscast, but you have to go the broader picture. Go over the course of the day. Go over the course of the day with the website and everything like that, because we strive to achieve that balance. And just very quickly talk about the separation between it's like the separation between the editorial board and the newsroom at a newspaper.
Right.
It's very definite like that in news talk radio, but with one exception, is that I am constantly letting the talk producers know what we're covering, because a lot of the interviews that I do are going to be wind up used by the talk show host, and the talk show host may not like what this particular politician said. It's typically because it's Maryland, it's typically a Democratic politician, and our right-leaning talk show host will use a soundbite of my story and then start criticizing things. And the talk side lets us know that, hey, we're going to have this, these three guests today. Some of them may be newsworthy. I have a wonderful producer who I work with in the afternoon who will actually put the audio file in my folder, and I can just access that without having to plod through air checks to get this stuff on the air. And so there is a synergy between the two departments, but there is still that separation because they're on a different mission than us.
John knows Shepard Smith. Do you have the Shepard Smith syndrome there, where you have yourself trying to do the news stuff, but your whole news department is painted by the opinion side that takes up the bulk of the programming during a talk show?
Sometimes you get the sense, and it's not so much with the full-time talk hosts as it is with the part-time talk hosts that will, and especially if you're in the same room with them or you're hearing them, they start, criticizing the media and say, the media's out to get us, the media's out to get us. And then he says, we'll be right back after the news. So, it's trying to, in some ways, sometimes these talk hosts and some of these folks are now no longer at WBAL, and I'm not naming anybody or anything like that. But over the years, you sometimes get that. I had one talk show host no longer with the station who was very offended every time I came in to do a news bulletin, a legitimate news bulletin. He thought it was some sort of conspiracy to keep him off the air. That person is no longer on the air. And I will say, because I have such a wonderful management backed me in that fight. So that was, and that's very encouraging. So I haven't had a lot of the Shepard Smith or the Chris Wallace experiences there, that they have had. And the other thing I will do when I'm in the course of the day, now I listen to our station in the car, I listen to our station at home. If I weren't be recording right now, as I would be doing work, prep work and stuff, I'd be listening to the station on my phone right now. But once I get to the station, I'm one of the few people allowed in the building to the pandemic. I'm in the big production room where I anchor my newscast. By and large, I'm not listening to what's going on to the talk show hosts, because it's not entertaining or anything like that. I have work to do. I have to gather stories. I have to gather facts. I have to do my job. So I can't really worry about what the talk show hosts are doing or saying. That's one of the reasons why the producers let me know which guests they have on and which callers might be interesting. So generally you have to sometimes shut them out, shut out the talk side and the opinion side in order to do your job.
That's interesting. I mean, I can say that I won't name names either, but I know of institutions like the ones that you describe where there's two sides. There's an editorial side and there's a news side. And I think the people that I know from the news side of those institutions are really serious about wanting to do a good job. I mean, it's the main thing they're thinking about is that, they're not the talk side. And of course, the talk side gets most of the ink, I suppose.
Listen, I also, if we shifted to television a bit, because I'm in Baltimore, in Hunt Valley, Maryland, Sinclair, which owns hundreds of television stations, including some in Pennsylvania, they're based here. One of their flagships is in Baltimore, just down the road from us, the Fox station here in Baltimore. And then they also own their other flagships, the ABC station in Washington. I have friends who work in the news department at both of those stations. Now, that company has been accused of trying to manipulate news coverage, to one side or the other, mostly to a Republican side. But there are some genuinely talented reporters and photographers who work at that station who all they want to do is cover the stories fairly and accurately and tell good stories, and they strive to do that. But it's a struggle for them, and they've told me that. And it's not. I am very lucky to work for a company like Hearst that doesn't encourage, and in fact doesn't do those things. They don't tell you to skew stories to a particular view. There are other companies that, be it Sinclair, be it Nexstar, be it Scripps, being the others, the big boys in town that don't operate that way. I am very lucky to work for a company that doesn't operate that way, that knows the value of solid journalism, protects it, and invests in the resources in it. Even in radio, and on the Hearst side, we're the only two radio stations, WBAL and 98 Rock, that they own. We were their first radio stations that Hearst owned, but they largely got out of the rest of the radio business in the mid-90s to buy more television stations. But Hearst supports us. I mean, they've invested in new studios, equipment. They promote our work. The TV side promotes our work, and we promote theirs. So I'm very lucky at this stage of my life to be where I am and doing this. And it was viewed as a dream job 16 years ago, and it was always viewed as a dream job. And thank God it still is.
Let's talk about the future, Rob.
Yeah.
We've talked about where we are right now with radio news. Do you think it'll still be relevant with all of the Facebook and Twitter and all of the other inroads? Will it still be relevant in 10, 15 years?
I think so, but I think less and less of the terrestrial radio platform in your car and more of an online platform. So you will have the constant live streaming, where more of the audience, even in their cars, may not be having to, on the radio, may not have to tune in a station, but instead will connect to their car's Wi-Fi and then get the live stream of WBAL or KYW or any of the other stations and get their information. And they'll get their music that way and get their talk programming that way as well. I also think that we may be getting into the news on demand business where you will record a newscast and the people can call up their Alexa-like device or whatever and bring up that particular newscast. So they don't have to wait until the top of the hour. You're already seeing that. I mean, you already see that with websites and everything like that. But I think there's probably going to be something a little more structured in the next 10 to 15 years. It would not, and we may even do it custom to, if we have the resources to it, custom to a particular region. So the news of Dauphin County, somebody who lives in Dauphin County in Pennsylvania could get all the news of Dauphin County, while their neighbor in Cumberland County could hit another button and get the news from Cumberland County. I think that's where, one of the innovations that's headed. In terms of the live coverage and everything else, look, radio does it better than anybody else, and we can do it faster than anybody else, and I think there will still be a demand for that. I remember, in the early days of the pandemic, there was some online chatter. One of my Facebook friends, somebody asked, I love listening to podcasts, but is there a way that a podcast could tell me what's happening right now and give me live coverage of what's happening right now? And somebody replied, yes, it's called radio. And that's why we're always going to be around.
I hope that's true. I really want that to be true because I'm a radio fan down to the soles of my feet, always have been. And we do turn the radio on during the day just to listen to it, so
sure.
We may be stickouts in that way, but I'm sure Don does it too. Don't you, Don? You still listen to radio. You better.
Oh yeah.
It's a generational thing. If you grew up with it, you're still using it. The challenge for us is we have to, bring on the folks who didn't grow up with radio being a force in their lives. And they're by and large folks under 40. They might remember sitting in the back seat of their car and their parents listening to Prairie Home Companion or Morning Edition on the left or Rush Limbaugh on the right. And they think that's what my parents do. Well, then, as those folks get older, you have to stress the value of it and why it's important, because podcasts can't bring you live coverage. We can. And that's we got to bring them into the fold.
Well, thanks for all of the insight and all of the stories. And we do hope that radio continues to go for you and for everybody else. I'm crossing my fingers. And yeah, I think, I follow radio on the actual radio dial, but I also follow it on the web.
Yeah.
And if that's where it's going, I think I'm going there too. So
Yes.
if anybody wants to listen to Rob Lang on WBAL, what is the website that they can go to?
WBAL.com. We also have an app, the WBAL app. You can listen live. You can see all of our stories. We are 1090 on the AM dial. We still have a very strong AM signal that can be heard up and down the East Coast. 101.5 on the FM dial. We are also, if you're an HD radio, it's 97.2 HD1.
All over the place. Thanks a lot, Rob, for being with us today.
Great stuff.
Be well, Don. Be well, John. Thanks.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with us, the email address is musicalinnertube@gmail.com. On Twitter, John is @JTimPayne and Don is @DonRooney9. Our webpage is musicalinnertube, that's musical spelled with two A's, .libsyn, spelled LIBSYN.com. And here's something new. The Innertube is now available on Amazon Music. If you're a member of Amazon Prime or are subscribed to Amazon Music, just type Musical Innertube in the search box and voila, there we are. We're also available on Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio Podcasts. Like us and give us a good review on any of those platforms. Hey, and here's something else new. Harkening back to our college radio days, John and I are very fond of doing full radio plays, especially around the holidays with sound effects and music and other actors. Right now we have a Halloween feature posted just for you entitled The Werepig of London. To listen, go to musicalinnertubeplayers.libsyn.com, musicalinnertubeplayers.libsyn.com, or go to YouTube and type Musical Innertube Players in the search box. And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing our theme music.